table.
The third objective is to determine the role of human performance concepts in preventing fatalities, especially as it relates to the human systems integration and the recognition and elimination of error precursors.
Well, the first step is to recognize that our current efforts, first step is to analyze your metrics and your efforts and to see if you're seeing any reductions or any issues associated. And what we've learned in the conference is that there is a small subset related to serious injury and fatalities that isn't going to be captured by traditional methods. So one is to recognize that and analyze your metrics and then go forward with a parallel program in addition to your traditional program to address that specific subset.
We really need to engage the workforce in identifying talking about the tasks that they perform and identifying the hazards before they perform the task.
We really need to shift company leadership from looking at injuries and loss to thinking about risk and thinking about the exposures that they put people in. A lot of companies inadvertently put employees in very high risk, severe exposure situations. They put low levels of control on them and they expect employees never to make a mistake. And it's just not realistic.
Recognizing how frequently the potential for hazards that lead to fatalities actually are. That's the first step. They're happening a lot more frequently than we really understand or recognize in the past.
I think workers have to be defensive. And we always talk about, the offensive things of safety management systems and maybe these other things that people can do. I say people have to be on their guard. And in my presentation, I give them a couple of tools to make them defensive in the workplace. And I think from my personal point of view, that is one of the most important things in order not to have a fatal event in the workplace.
Precursors.
Precursors are predictable and preventable. If we know what we're looking for, if we learn to recognize those precursors as organizations, we can predict and prevent them, and our serious injuries and fatalities will go down to zero.
Personally, for me, some of the things and takeaways that I had from the conference was how important it is to have a strong EHS management system as a backdrop, but more importantly, the ability to drive deep into tasks and identify the critical steps in any task that we do at work and identify how we can do those steps safely and what are the stop criteria that everybody must commit to and agree upon to make sure that that step of that task commences and is completed in a safe manner.
The fourth objective is to evaluate the influence of an individual's perception of risk, the required mental and physical aspects of the task, and any latent conditions and performance modes as they relate to fatality prevention.
The second part of fatality prevention is the human side of it and the variability and making sure we work with people so they identify where are the hazards and what the stop criteria for work would be.
And a lot of safety instruction historically has been trying to get people to think in a common way. So kind of trying to make things common sense. But it was only common sense for the safety professionals. It wasn't common sense for the worker. It wasn't common sense for the manager.
Contracted services poses a greater risk because contractors, by their very nature, are not typical in our operations. And because of that, they tend to not know how our operations work and can create undue hazards for themselves and our workers. So while we talk about the best practices for managing that hazard and that risk, I think we'll begin to look at some of those kinds of things.
The only way to really make progress in safety is to go out and really aggressively look for hazards, look for things that are going to get people hurt. And the only way to do that is to really enlist everybody. A lot of accidents occur during upset conditions, and If it's just a corporate safety manager walking around looking at things, he or she is never going to see that unless they're there right when the upset happens. But the workers who have to deal with it, sometimes at 3 in the morning, know about those things. So you have to first aggressively look for problems, and second, you've got to enlist the people who are actually going to be exposed to the problems to be able to find them and ultimately correct them.
Some of the topics that we discussed were the things, the actual conditions in the workplace or the work environment or the organizational culture that influenced the task and had attributes that made it a high-risk task. We also discussed activities like work at elevated heights, work in confined spaces, handling molten metal, hot substances, or reactive materials. As examples, mobile equipment, pedestrian interface, electrical work, those types of activities that have and carry a more significant potential in terms of the end consequence if something goes wrong.
Chevron showed us and actually had a copy for each of us of a hazard recognition and hazard identification book that an employee can carry in the field.
But if you had to pick one finding out of the discussion we had on metrics, it's the idea that the discussion around worker health and safety needs to change, and it needs to change from being focused on relatively minor cases, under the OSHA system, to really focusing on serious risk.